I'm really delighted to be here on behalf of our organisation, who are also delighted to be part of this really crucial conversation. In asking us to prepare a short introduction, Roberta suggested saying why we focus on fashion. So obviously Oxfam is an international aid agency. What we do every day is humanitarian response and long-term development to help people overcome poverty and disaster. So why would we work on fashion? It is for all of the reasons that Charlotte mentioned, that fashion is one of the biggest contributors, more than flying and more than shipping, to global carbon emissions and the climate crisis that we are all experiencing. And the first reason why we care about that is the impact that that has on the world's poorest. So the world's poorest people, the communities in which we work, did the least to create climate change, and yet they are the most impacted. Every day they suffer extreme weather events which threaten not only their livelihoods and their local communities and infrastructure, but also their lives, which we've seen over the course of the last few years increasing with hurricanes and tsunamis. So that's why we talk about fashion, because we believe it's part of our mandate to support communities to overcome poverty and disaster. I suppose another reason why we talk about fashion is because we are involved in it. We have a network of 50 shops across the island of Ireland selling second-hand clothes, accessories, shoes and books. And we, I suppose, are very proud to be part of the solution to throwaway fashion. So to the vast amount, Redress tells us it's about 225,000 tonnes of textiles that are dumped in Ireland every year. That's the equivalent of over 5,000 lorry loads of textiles that are dumped in Ireland, not recycled and not reused every year. And so we're proud to be part of the solution to that, to throwaway fashion, in that our shops facilitate a place where people can donate unwanted items so that they can be reused and recycled and diverted, most importantly, from landfill. So our campaigning work on sustainability and climate, it targets three main audiences: the government, the private sector and the public. I think through our network of shops, we're extremely encouraged and inspired by the very mobilized movement of people who are making individual change to impact the environment for the better. And we want to support that and be part of that in any way we can. And we want to also offer people ways that they can live more sustainably through our shops. But we also know that while that is so important, what is also important is the structural and systemic change that will help us to tackle the climate crisis. And so we have our targets include then the government and the private sector. So we target the government through a coalition called Stop Climate Chaos to call for action on climate, and private sector through our work with the shops and also our advocacy and policy work.
The reason why New began, as you kind of mentioned in the introduction, was in 2013 I was on a programme with the Irish charity called SUIS. So essentially what they do is they send groups of volunteers over to India for a summer programme. And I really like SUIS because they do it a lot about kind of understanding that there's a problem with the likes of volunteerism, and there's a problem about this kind of mentality of being a white saviour and being able to help out. And so they send you over there really to say, like, we're funded by like Irish Aid, and we do this because we want to send Irish students over to different parts of the world to really see how we live affects other people. And not necessarily that you can change anything when you're there, but that you then understand how the world works and you have a better perspective and you're able to kind of create change, hopefully, when you get back. And I guess we were kind of a textbook example of how that worked. So myself and Ali, who I co-founded New with originally, we were both on the program. I was based in Kolkata and Ali was in Delhi, and we didn't actually know each other at this time, but we both had just a massively life-changing experience, I guess. It was like very, very clear the amount of vulnerable people that were affected by our consumption habits. How, I guess, like when you get under the skin of it, you kind of think the fashion industry couldn't possibly be this bad, and then you start to realize that it is, and it's actually quite a lot worse. And And as Paula was saying, like, or sorry, you mentioned in her bio that like the True Cost documentary is like a massive turning point. That was definitely the same for me as well. Like, I'd recommend, if anyone hasn't seen it yet, to watch it on Netflix. But it's just a documentary that kind of takes you through all of the different issues in the fashion industry in a really easily digestible way. So yeah, essentially I've been over in India, and I think the easiest way to describe kind of like how I changed was, before I went over there, I had heard about a clothing market in Delhi where they sell all of the high street brands at a knockdown price. And this is about the equivalent of €1 or €2. And before I went, I was so excited, like loved high street, just bought it all the time, spent any money that I did make on fashion, and had never thought about the consequences. And I actually really wanted to be a fashion designer. I didn't go into that, but kind of eventually ended up working in fashion. But it was just this, like no thought behind what happens to the clothes before they get to you, they enter the shop floor, and where do they go after they leave you as well, and the kind of lives that they have, and the responsibility that we have as kind of consumers and as owners of those pieces to give them a full life and the kind of life they intended to have. And so the year I was in India was also the year of the Rana Plaza building collapse, which was a garment factory that collapsed in Dhaka in Bangladesh, and a lot of the reason the kind of fashion revolution was started up in the first place. And I just got home and felt really, really sick. Like, I arrived in Delhi to that clothing market, and because obviously we had discovered everything that has been happening, like, I just never felt so sick in my life, like standing in front of these mountains of clothes and thinking, these organizations are probably still making a profit on the clothing that they're selling at this tiny knockdown price. And all of these clothes, like the amount of exploitation that had happened for these clothes to be made, and the environmental pollution, and all of the kind of consequences that go beyond that. These clothes actually weren't even going to be worn. And it was just this kind of feeling that when I got home, I was still in college at the time, and we were just constantly looking for these new outlets to be more sustainable. But you're kind of competing with this really, really cheap fast fashion, all of these social norms that we have, where we're kind of expected to dress in a certain way. We're expected to follow these like massively quick changing trends where there's kind of seasons every week rather than every couple of months. And just kind of this feeling that like you had to be a certain type of person to also get out of it, or you had to have the money to get out of it. And that sustainable fashion in some ways can be a luxury, especially in terms of like how brands are creating sustainable fashion. And so myself and Ali met 2 years later, the year that the True Cost came out, and we got talking about all the experiences that we had had and felt really, really the same. And I guess when we started looking in terms of solutions and things that we could afford, or things that we could actually do at the point in our lives that we were in now, was really all around, I guess, discovering that we already shared clothes as friends. So for any events that had come up, for any occasions that we were doing, we would just kind of naturally look in each other's wardrobes. And the more we started to research that, and the more we started to understand, actually, we don't need to buy ourselves into sustainability, or we don't need to change who we are overnight, but we already have a wardrobe of clothes that we can actually start wearing. And if we can't do that individually, we can do it collectively, and ensure for that period of time where the clothes are with us before they go to the likes of Oxfam and go and have their second life, that we can kind of fulfill an initial life cycle as much as we possibly can. And that was like a really liberating time. It was just this, I guess, realization that we didn't necessarily need to wait for brands, that we could be those kind of agents of change, but that we needed some sort of collective to be able to implement that, and to kind of understand and recognize the power that we had as individuals, no matter what our purchasing power, no matter that we couldn't go and like obtain this capsule wardrobe all in the space of like 5 minutes, but that we could slowly over time start using some of the pieces in our wardrobe that we loved and wanted to keep, and give those an extra life. So the likes of things that you might have a really nice work wardrobe that you sometimes get bored of, but it's perfectly fine to keep, you can share those out. You might have a ball dress that you wore to a ball. Realistically, it's probably going to be 5 years before you wear it again, and at that stage you might not have a ball to go to. Those are the types of pieces that you can share, and that as a community we can start kind of like using the resources. And I would say about sustainable fashion as well is that it's really important for people to have several different options to be more sustainable in their habits. It's not the likes of fast fashion where it's one model that is done and everyone should do it, and so there's this really highly competitive space. but that you should be able to swap certain pieces that you're ready to part with. You should pass pieces on to charity shops and pieces that you know people will also like to buy for a second life. And then the likes of Depop kind of selling on that. And then for the pieces that you'd like to keep for a period of time, you could share those. And so it's really important, I guess, as a community as well, which is so nice about sustainable fashion, is that there's like a space for everyone to kind of grow together. And I think that's what's really needed in order to, I guess, make the fast fashion industry irrelevant, because there's so many options. Sorry, I've gone on for a little while now, so I'll finish up there.
So much for doing this. It's so great to be part of this, mostly now that we cannot do anything with UCD Clothes Swap. We started UCD Clothes Swap when I was in my second year with Sorsha. We were both like auditors of horticulture. And so just with the fashion industry, because it was just entering South America, like it wasn't as big as it is in Europe at all. But the problem with that is that we have our indigenous groups that do lots of clothes, you know, natively, and they're beautiful clothes. Get, I don't know, shoes or leather or this was becoming very not fashionable because Zara was getting into Ecuador and H&M and all these brands. And that was a bit shocking to see, because I think our indigenous groups are holy. But the thing is that I started thinking, maybe it's not so great, but all of my friends bought it, like they were crazy about it. And then when I watched the true cost, like I fully on believed that it was horrific. Then I read more about it. And with Fashion Revolution, they do like an amazing job to inform people. It was like, I completely turned my mind. And with Sorcia, we were talking about how bad it is with human rights abuse mostly. It's what shocks me the most, that like everyone I know, like my age, buys so many clothes and adores buying clothes. And it's also more, I think it's sad because as in the True Cost, they talk a lot about it. It's also they play a lot with psychological ads and like getting to young people for you to feel bad, and always you need to get more clothes and more clothes to feel sexy or good with yourself or stuff. So we decided to give an alternative to that. And it's like, we understand that we all want new clothes and like something new because we already have that culture in us. But at least while we're in college, we can create a culture of exchanging that between us, because all of us have so many clothes. Like it's so necessary, at least I think, that we can always be exchanging between each other, because also all of our clothes are like in incredible state, and otherwise we would like give it to the trash or charity shops. And I bet Oxfam doesn't do it, but also we have spoke with some charity shops, and they always tell us that sometimes they receive so many clothes that they have to send it abroad to other countries, which is also create like another problem. So yeah. And then Sorsha moved to Germany, but we started doing Monthly Clothes Swap with like a new committee and everything, and they've been working well. We were gonna do a lot of stuff these months, but with the virus.
For new, I realize I probably didn't even touch on this in the introduction. We basically have created an app called the New Wardrobe, where you're able to upload pieces of items that you're happy for people to borrow, and then you can borrow from other people in return. So you're just able to pop on there, and then if you have something coming up, you're able to borrow. And how we kind of calculate that is that we've done a impact calculator with the London Waste and Recycling Board. So essentially it looks at the kind of carbon, waste and water offset that you would have through sharing. So the RAP, who is the Waste Recycling Action Plan, I want to say, they did a report in 2013 which covered a lot of kind of new models of circulating clothing. What they looked into was essentially the finding is that for every 4 times an item is shared through the likes of sharing platforms or swapping platforms, you offset 1 item of clothing from being made and 1 item of clothing from going to landfill. So for every time an item is shared, you offset 25% of the resources that would have been used in the production of a new piece of clothing. And then we kind of look at the various different materials that are used in the pieces that you're sharing. And that can range from various different things. So say if you were to have the likes of a cotton t-shirt, that can be 2,700 litres of water, which is about 22 bathtubs. And for the likes of a silk dress, that can go up to 65,000 litres of water, depending on like how it's made. and what it takes to kind of make that material into an initial textile. So we need to get a lot more granular with it, but it's a great way of kind of positively reinforcing the action to our members, so that each time they borrow, they're able to have an understanding of what kind of offset that does. It is difficult to establish the kind of connection of, if somebody borrowed something, would they have been likely to buy something brand new at that time, or how many times would that have happened, or what would have been the environmental impact? Because you have a range of different things. You have people would have bought in store, people would have got it delivered. There's obviously a way higher impact if it goes from in store to then delivery. So loads of those kind of things are difficult to understand within the industry, but the action sharing, we know, is a lower impact than if you were to buy, and then being able to do them or in different kind of using different types of delivery systems can lower that impact again. So that's kind of how we would try to measure the change of our users. What we hope from a more behavioral aspect is people reduce the amount of fast fashion they buy firsthand. But right now we can't like actually say that that is necessarily what's happening. We just hope it is.
I believe the impact that I know of clothes and what people have told me is more personal with like the campus in UCD. Like, I believe that is very important for everyone to try to do a change in your community. And right now my community is UCD. And so what every person that comes to the clothes swaps or like joins the Instagram and stuff, they say it's a very positive experience for them because they never knew it was so bad. And I think that's the main problem. Most girls and boys that consume fast fashion don't know how horrible it is, because it's portrayed as just clothes and like pretty models and everyone is young like us. You will never imagine, as Aisling was saying, that is so horrific. And so I think what we do really well is inform people our age and our community. And also, I think because we have an approach of making it fun, it really creates an environment of, you can come to our classes, have fun, have a chat, eat some vegan cake, and then you go, between classes or stuff. So I believe it's great just in shaping people's mind while we're still young.
One of the most tangible ways that we try to have an impact on fast fashion is through our network of secondhand shops that hopefully, that do divert textiles going to landfill and in some way tackle the throwaway fashion culture that we now have in Ireland. So I think that's one of the main ways. I suppose to touch on Paula's point as well, our shops are community based. They're local green hubs in 50 communities across the island. So there also is more opportunities that we'd love to continue to explore to use our shops to increase awareness and understanding of the impact of fashion on the environment, as well as the impact of fashion on poor and vulnerable people, especially women. So that would be the kind of most tangible way that we are having a radical impact on the fashion industry. I suppose the other way then is through our advocacy and campaigning work. So as I mentioned before, we also target the government and private sector in ways that they can affect structural change that will mean that the impact of fashion on the environment and on the climate is less. A key point of our general election manifesto for the last election that happened there in February, which seems a lifetime ago now with everything that has happened since, was calling for a circular economy. So an economy that would eliminate waste and pollution from the life cycle of a product. And that would look to reuse and recycle more and also utilize natural materials more. So we're also hoping that governments can implement policy changes and legislation changes for suppliers and brands and shops and the private sector that could make it a more sustainable industry. And I suppose the third way then that we are having an radical impact on the fashion industry is through our work with garment workers. So we have a program in Dhaka in Bangladesh, where Aisling mentioned earlier, and has plays such a key role in the fashion industry. I think it accounts for 5%. 5% of global garment production comes from Bangladesh, and we have programs there working with women. It is women who make our clothes. 80 to 90% of garment workers are women. And so we have programs there working on unionizing and collective bargaining to make sure that the women who make our clothes are paid a fair wage and work in decent working conditions. COVID has had a major impact on that. Almost 1 million garment workers in Bangladesh have been temporarily or permanently laid off, which will have a really serious and significant impact on their ability to, well, A, generate income and then provide for themselves and for their families. So the fashion industry is a really complex one. Those women in Bangladesh depend on those jobs. They desperately need them. Many of them ignored government advice and tried to remain in Dhaka and tried to remain working. Some of them told our staff there in Bangladesh that to die from COVID was a maybe, but to die from no income was certain. So it's a really difficult and complex issue that needs a really robust response from people, mobilized people, but also from our government, our world leaders and our leaders here and the private sector. So those are the 3 ways that we attempt to have an impact on the fashion industry.
I think that's campus, because there's many girls that are like, okay, how can I switch? Because I love fashion anyways. Yeah. And I think it has nothing to do with loving, but as we were saying, there's so many layers to sustainable fashion that I think it's amazing. Because you have charity shops that are incredible and have so many good pieces, like, and even brands and stuff. And then you have clothes swaps, and then you have all that is so great. And then you can also just like swap with your friends. So I would say, in order to lower down your consumption in fast fashion and swifting from it, you can go layer from layer and like exploring each one and seeing like what's the best option for you. Because I've met people that really don't like charity shops and they just like clothes swaps, or the opposite, you know? So I think that's just exploring around all the layers of sustainable fashion that are available to you in your city.
A letter is called a wardrobe challenge. So normally when things are normal, you put all the hangers in your wardrobe facing one way, and then every day as you wear something, you flip the hanger, and then at the end of the month, you look at your wardrobe and you try to see, what have I actually worn? Obviously that's a bit difficult now because we're all kind of wearing the same thing every day. But if you can have a think back, if you can just lay out all of your pieces of clothing in your wardrobe and just flip the hangers of the things that you wear most often, understand the things that you never wore at all. And what it helps you to do is gain a more kind of like conscious method if you do go to purchase something new, whether that be pre-loved or firsthand. You want to kind of be understanding why you're consuming it all and where the need is for it, and if you're going to kind of love it, or if you're going to wear it 30 times, or if you're going to be able to share it. So generally some of the reasons that people buy things are because of the trends, but trends are very much dictated by the industry and they're not necessarily to suit your personal style. So often you'll get into a bit of a rut where you kind of see things that look really great on these like super thin models who like are photoshopped, so they're not even really a real representation of how it's going to look or make you feel, and by the time you actually end up wearing it, it might not suit you. So what you're probably going to find when you do start understanding what you wear the most is the color is really good on you, the shape is really good on you, or there's something about the quality of the piece that makes you feel really good. If you feel really good in a piece, you're gonna naturally wear it more. So starting to understand your personal style a little bit more and understanding the pieces in your wardrobe that you really love is going to inform your decisions of what you get in the future, no matter how you kind of purchase or swap it or get it. So I think that's a really good way of kind of starting where you are and starting in the circumstances that you have, is just understanding a little bit more about you and what you would actually like to wear and how you would like to express yourself, rather than having the industry dictate that to you all the time. Another thing is just don't wash your jeans. So denim isn't supposed to be washed. If you do want to clean it, you should air dry it, just hang it outside, or put it in a plastic bag and leave it in the freezer. And like if you were to buy like a luxury denim product, they would recommend that you don't wash it at all, because it kind of does things to the shape. But a lot of the impact of clothing happens in the washing cycle. So you can like reduce that straight away if you're looking at denims, and they're super like high users of water, I guess, to actually like make them and things like that. And then if you're kind of looking at where do you go after this, and we all do go back to normal life, after you've done your wardrobe audit, start earmarking the things that you would like to bring to a charity shop, things that might look really good on your friends, and just offer to give them to you, or to give them to your friends, or look at the pieces that you would like to keep but you're not wearing that often, and then upload them to the new app and start kind of understanding, okay, I might actually challenge myself to not buy anything. And that's kind of like the other pledge that you can look at doing, is like this not buying anything new pledge. And we have a few members of our community who kind of use new because they've made that pledge. Obviously it's a lot easier now to not buy anything because we don't actually really need to, but online shopping has increased significantly. So like in the likes of Pretty Little Things, they went from 120,000 orders per month to 400,000 orders per month. And like people's lives are really being put at risk now, having to go to distribution centers, and people are buying the likes of like £9 boot tubes, which is just totally unnecessary. So if you're kind of looking for a time to change your habits, now is perfect. And it's all about just getting to know a little bit more about what you like, what can you do with the pieces that you already have, and then starting to get yourself into the right mindset of how you want to be in the future.
Yeah, I suppose for us, what we would say to people is obviously to donate your unwanted items, especially during this period of time. I know in quarantine and lockdown, we're all decluttering, and the temptation as it sits in your hallway or by your door will be to throw it in the bin. And I suppose that would be our first thing to say. I know no one on this call would do it, but if this is recorded, is to not do that, is to save it and bring it to your local Oxfam or your local charity shop once this is all over, and we can leave our houses again. We do have donation banks as well across the country, but we are asking people at the moment, if they are kind of decluttering and bagging up unwanted items, that they would save it and not put it in the banks, because they're not being serviced at the moment for the protection of the people who usually service those. We also do have a campaign. It runs every September. It's called Secondhand September, where people take a 30-day pledge to say no to new. And so I think, as Aisling mentioned as well, that's a nice initiative to do, whether you do it with us in September or whether you decide to do it for 6 months or for a year, whatever. I think saying no to new is one way that we can take personal action to live a life that a bit more sustainable lifestyle. And I suppose through Secondhand September, it was really nice because it was a campaign where we really interacted with the consumers who shop in our shops. And one of the key things we really saw is that charity shops are a really good place to look for those investment pieces. So we hear that a lot when it comes to trying to shop more sustainably, is to invest in key pieces that we'll keep in our wardrobes for years. And charity shops are full of those. They're full of pre-loved quality designer items, pre-loved quality boutique items that came from Irish designers, British designers, and designers all over the world. And they're full of quality vintage. And so your local charity shop actually is somewhere to have a good browse and to invest in some key pieces then that you will keep in your wardrobe. And you can also then avail of swapping and sharing with your friends so that they get to wear them too. And then I suppose the final thing that we would say as Oxfam, as a campaigning organisation, is to use your voice. So especially at times like this, when the fashion industry is at risk, because whole economies are being shut down, obviously, by this lockdown, to continue to use your voice as a consumer, it's really, really powerful. It really has weight. We are the people who shop in the shops that brands supply clothes to, and so our voice has weight. And so I would just encourage you to use it. And I suppose a key way that you could use it right now is on behalf of the female garment workers, the women who make our clothes, to ask brands now what they're doing to ensure the protection of the women who make the clothes for them, their livelihoods.
But the Environmental Audit Committee in the UK did kind of a landmark report called the Fixing Fashion Report. So that was like a massive audit of the environmental and social impacts of the industry, and they had like a lot of hearings with some of the larger fashion brands. So essentially, one of the key learnings from that was brands were asked if they could make a t-shirt or a shirt for £5 within the kind of boundaries of the planet, and kind of like ensuring that we're like not overusing our resources and without exploiting workers? And the answer was no. So we now know that you cannot make cheap clothing without harming people or the planet. That's kind of the fact of life. And so a lot of the change needs to be that the amount of money that you need to pay for an item that's made fairly and with sustainability in mind is going to be more expensive. So we need to understand how we share that cost over the lifetime of that piece among like citizens and how we consume those pieces. But basically the report brought up a lot of pretty good recommendations, and also recommendations that you would imagine can be easily implemented within the industry. So they would have had like a 1p tax on every garment that's sold to put recycling infrastructure into the UK, because a lot of places in Western society don't have the infrastructure to recycle, because so much of our trash is like exported. So if you're kind of looking for like what kind of policies can be implemented, I would say that report has pretty much all of the policies that we need. The likes of France have done some movements into like kind of restrictions around being able to burn clothes and being able to just dump unsold stock. So there needs to be a lot of work on that. But actually the recommendations of the report were brought to the UK government and they rejected all recommendations. So that's really, really disappointing. So essentially what their excuse was that with Brexit coming up, they couldn't like be held accountable for actually implementing these recommendations. But what a lot of the reason is like who owns the fashion industry and where do they have sway? Generally, they're really, really rich people. Often they're men. There's like one, Forever 21, who I think are gone now, was originally co-founded by a woman, and I think a woman might have been in some way involved in the setup of Boohoo, but every other single fast fashion brand is owned by a white man in general, except for Pretty Little Things. And Boohoo and Pretty Little Things are owned by the same family. Arcadia Group owns a tons of stores, including Topshop. Then you have H&M, who owns COS and H&M, and they kind of like own everything. And they have a lot of power. So I think governments need to stop thinking so much about fair competition for fast fashion brands, and they need to be implementing the policies that are going to make sure that the fashion industry exists in the future and exists in the right way. Ways that people can help that be implemented, I would say like the initial one is Fashion Revolution, which is coming up next week. Also in what Alice was talking about in terms of like understanding how garment workers are being looked after now, there's a pay up campaign, because a lot of brands, high street brands, including Primark, I know H&M said that they were going to pay their brand for the stuff that had been made, but they actually haven't put a date on that. Essentially, brands aren't paying for orders that have already been produced. And there's a campaign to call out brands and ask them to pay up, in the same way that Fashion Revolution next week will be asking people to call out the brands that they like and say, who made my clothes? So like there is essentially policy ready to go. And I think now it needs to be people power that's going to push that, because governments are so going to be out of whack with the whole pandemic. They were already not implementing these kind of measures before, but it needs to be consumer pressure and large scale campaigns, and the likes of the influence of NGOs like Oxfam, and then the kind of consumer sentiment just completely changing, I would say. But like getting informed on what those changes are, finding campaigns that really speak to you, and then doing what you can from your home to kind of push those campaigns out to your own social network, I think is a really, really good way to start.
Our key asks to the government right now are to, I suppose, legislate for a more circular economy, sort of an economy that really eliminates waste and pollution. And to do that, we would need a very clear action plan for the textile industry on what they do with waste, and how they work to eliminate pollution and emissions. And so in our general election manifesto, which I can share as well with this group if that's helpful, we had a number of acts, which was to create that action plan that should obviously have key legislative frameworks that link into the EU's waste hierarchy. So the EU already has the waste hierarchy, and at the top of that is preventing it. So just to prevent waste and to stop things going to landfill, and then also to reuse and to recycle where possible. Then the government also needs to create policy changes so that the private sector is incentivized to implement more circular economy practices, and so that it's a priority for them and something that they want to do, as opposed to have to be kind of shamed into doing or persuaded to do. And then I suppose one of the other key things which I've already touched on is to insist on transparency then throughout the textile change. Yes, when it comes to what happens to waste, and whether or not that's incinerated or dumped, but also then throughout the entire textile chain, which includes the people who make it, the supplier chains as well. So there are a number of legislative and policy changes that the government need to make in order to make it a fairer and more sustainable industry. And I suppose just to touch on what Aisling said, you know, the world really, and understandably so, is very focused on a global health pandemic. But that will really impact the global mobilization and solidarity that was really growing around climate action. And so we need to be aware of that, and we need to keep on flying that flag throughout this process and after it. The climate conference for global leaders that was supposed to take place this year, it's not going to, it's going to take place next year. And so the climate crisis, which is a global emergency now, it's really being pushed to the back of world leaders' minds, and with that then the impact that the fashion industry has, which we know is major and significant. So I think it's also about using our voice to make sure that world leaders don't forget that, and that our leaders can show leadership in this, and in reminding people that they need to tackle these issues now, and that they haven't paused just as the world paused.
We talk a lot usually when we do panel discussions with UCD Clothes Swap in UCD. I believe is, as I was saying, you know, the Copenhagen Agreement too on fast fashion, that there used to be a lot of conferences on it, but it failed totally, like nothing changed. Because what happened is they created like this set of regulations, but then the brands can choose if to follow them or not, which is like, makes no sense. I believe it should be regulated by the government, mostly back home. For example, I think in Ecuador for a few years, they put really high taxes in the clothes. So it was all fast fashion that should be cheap, but it wasn't cheap at all in Ecuador. So then, of course, people didn't buy as much, because even it was a better business and you're more used to going to Otavalo or other towns to get jumpers from or stuff that is like more circular and like local economy. So I know regulation works, but I think it's a big question, because governments need to care about circular economy in order to push these regulations, because there's a reason why there's so many fast fashion brands in every street in Dublin and in capitals, and it's because it creates so much money for the government too. But I believe that push from the government, it needs to also come from a push on people's education that know how bad the fast fashion industry is. So to be honest, I'm more on the side that education is everything. So you need to educate people since they're young, mostly girls that consume so much, into knowing how bad it is, for them then to push the government, for then the government to put regulations on everything. But then I think it's also complicated, and I would like to discuss about that issue that Alice have pointed out a lot. Is such a source of work in a lot of developing countries, mostly in Asia. So, but it's also true that fast fashion cannot be sustainable. Like the fact that it's fast fashion is because it creates so much all the time. So I just think it's like a very interesting and complex issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really strange and sad way, COVID-19 has kind of further shown us how fragile and unsustainable the fashion industry is, and how it really relies on a very unfair and unsustainable system. So I mean, the issue now for garment workers is that buyers, so the brands that buy clothes from these factories, but they don't own the factories and they don't employ the people who work in them, either cancelled or suspended orders, and didn't pay for orders that were in process or were complete. And then that meant that the garment workers were either permanently or temporarily laid off without pay or without redundancy or severance pay, in countries that have no safety nets. They don't have the social protection infrastructure to pay sick pay or social welfare or any of that. So, I mean, I think that really highlights that it's built on a very shaky and flimsy foundation, that when that crumbles, the people who are most impacted are the poorest and the most vulnerable. So I think, what can we do about that? Well, we can keep talking about that, and this can be a moment for people in the fashion industry to recognize that and to make changes, and also for the government then to make policy provisions that this wouldn't continue to happen, that this wouldn't happen again. We will have to change the way we work and the way we live and the way we consume after this anyway. So it is a key moment for us to show leadership and to make changes that will be better and that will benefit the world's poorest. I think, Paula's point, it's true. Like, the fashion industry is such a source of income for people in the global south, but it's not to say that couldn't continue to be the case in a sustainable fashion industry. I mean, we know there are lots of options out there in terms of recycled materials and ways that we could continue to produce clothes that would be ethical and sustainable, recyclable, reusable investment pieces. So I think it will absolutely need creative and innovative solutions, and it will need the backing of government, private sector, and the public. But I think now is a moment where we can really leverage that and begin to have those conversations and begin to look at that.
In the midst of this, it's just totally shown everyone how connected we are globally and how broken the system is. I think fundamentally it's really difficult for us all to tackle, because essentially the way the world works is just wrong. Like, capitalism is not working. So what you have is the owners of fast fashion brands are billionaires. And I actually saw a really good meme that was like, people don't really get the difference between a million and a billion. So if you have a million seconds, that's 4 days. And if you have a billion seconds, it's 31 years. So that's the kind of money that they have. So in comparison to what a garment worker is paid, to what those kind of CEOs and founders earn, is just insane. So I think what we need to first think about is the fast fashion industry toppling because it's not a good industry, and people don't need clothes, or there's not demand for it? Or is it toppling because one side of the chain is massively rich and the other side of the chain has no money, and the people who are massively rich don't want to put any money into their business in order to save their workers? Because a lot of how I feel all the time is that everyone can have a job in the fashion industry who has a job, and we can continue to produce clothing in a way that doesn't exploit people and doesn't exploit the planet. It's just that the people at the top aren't going to make billions and billions, which should be fine. But people just don't want the world to work that way, and the people who are most powerful are the people who are very rich. And so that's when you just start to realize, actually, when I go to buy clothes, who do I want to give my money to? Because if we can't necessarily change the entire system overnight, can we just start investing in the brands that we really do think are doing it right, and that the money is going to support people or support local businesses or support the people who actually make those clothes? Because with fast fashion, what you have is a brand that's a company, and then the people who make the clothes are a very separate company. What you have with a lot of local designers is that the people who design the clothes make the clothes. And that's the kind of system that works. And yes, I think we could do it still on more of a global scale, but a lot of fast fashion is going to topple over or whatever, but you have the government kind of furloughing workers, but it's in order so that the CEOs don't have any cut to their wage and things, and it's just so messed up. So I think kind of fundamentally understanding how do we change the industry is not to just take all of our money out of that industry, but it's to support the people who could actually give garment workers in these various different locations jobs in the right way. And I don't think that people should lose work over this, but I think that fast fashion as a concept needs to go, and that those people could, as the EAC said in their report, people are being exploited and they're not being paid a fair wage. So it's not that they couldn't be paid a fair wage, it's that the business decides that it wants to make more money and it keeps continuing needing to grow. In there lies the problem. Not that everyone could just have in a fair way. It's that there's a competition for who gets the most and who kind of wins in that situation. So I think for the campaigns that we really like, but just choose where it is that we want to actually invest our own money, and understand how far that can go for certain businesses as opposed to other businesses. Yeah, I think that's it's a very, very big problem.
I think it's so complicated because I do believe capitalism is not working. And I think fast fashion like shows it so well. Like it's such an amazing example of it. Because, for example, I cannot believe they work like 12 hours a day, no breaks. They even get abused, and like H&M and Zara and all those brands don't even know who is like the boss of the sweatshops and stuff like that. I just believe, like, I've read a lot of comparison of fast fashion with like a new colonialism, you know, because it's like always Western people, usually white men, and like taking all of the sources and taking all of the hard work from people in the global south and not receiving anything in exchange. That is exactly what happened in colonialism. So it's just the way that we allow it to. And for example, I believe just the fact that we don't know, that most people don't know how horrific it is, and that we're even supporting a new way of colonialism, is what is messed up. I think, like, again, I always talk about education in UCD Clothes Swap, but I think it's like the biggest thing. I feel the change that can be done for the global south to receive as much is just for people to know like how horrific it is, and even how many academics like compare it to the new colonialism, which it is. Because as Ersin said, it's like, how is it possible that the bosses have billions and they cannot pay, or like even pay better machines or better textiles for it not to be so bad for the world? Like, it's impossible, you know?
Yeah. Do you sell or donate all the clothes you receive, or do you have to throw out dispose of some?
Yeah. So we try to sell everything that we get donated. So when a bag of clothes comes into our shops, it is first of all sorted by staff or volunteers. And then the clothes that can be sold, so the clothes that are in good quality and resaleable, they are steamed and put out on the floor. And as many items from the bags possible are that happens with them. They're steamed and put out on the floor. If they don't sell on the floor, we send them to other shops where they might sell. As you know, secondhand shopping and charity shopping, it's a real kind of personal choice, and some people love the things that they find on the charity shop wheel, some people don't, and so we find moving them around the shops, if something doesn't sell in one shop, it very well will in another shop, and so that's how shop that doesn't necessarily sell in that shop gets moved on to other shops until it finds the owner that loves it, as often happens with charity shops. Everything else then we attempt to recycle. So we have a textile recycling partner, and we consistently review that partnership to make sure it's the right one for us. So textiles can be recycled by becoming fillers for mattresses or insulation, things like that. I suppose one thing we have really noticed is that in working with a private sector and textile industry, with end of line stock, or we all saw the sort of headlines when big brands kind of dump or incinerate clothes, and there's real public pressure that means that's not happening, and being able to track then where those clothes actually go if they can't be resold is really important. So that is something that we are continually looking into and continually trying to improve upon, because I think that will be really important in making sure that we can track exactly where it goes to and how it gets recycled if we're not able to sell it.
Yeah, I think and she wants to know from your experience if there is a gender component in the fashion issue. Among those aware of the problem and prone to change their habits, are there typically more female or male? I don't know if any of you have experience with that, and who would like to have a go on it.
To find some research that we did. Actually, I wasn't able to find it, so I will, and I'll share it with Charlotte or Roberta, so that they can share with this group if possible. See charity shops and the role that they play in sustainable fashion, and there's a breakdown of gender in that. So I will try and find that I mean, generally in terms of what our research shows us in terms of our consumers and the people who shop in our shops, it does sort of thrifting. But I'm interested to see what the other panelists would say as to whether they think there's a gender component to it.
Yeah, I think ours is more kind of like anecdotally as well. Just like we started off with swap shops, much like Paula, and women came. So like we kind of had like a guys section, and we just didn't really get a huge amount of traction. A lot of the guys I talked to, I guess, said as well that they just kind of wear the clothes that they have. And I know that that's kind of like a thing that happens in the industry as well. Like a lot of women's clothing, especially when it's very fast fashion, is just designed to kind of fall apart quite quickly in order to just keep buying more things. Whereas a lot of men's clothing has a bit more longevity because like men have the expectation that they'll wear it for longer, or they'll wear it several times. Especially in the case of like occasion wear, like the big difference there is like women wear an array of different dresses and different suit pieces, and men would just wear the same style of suit. So I guess it's kind of like there's probably like a lot of like, not to generalize, but like probably quite a lot of expectation on like what kind of pieces women can wear and how often they can wear the same piece. That's kind of like brought in a lot through like the Instagram culture and kind of like social media and everything like that these days as well. Big differences in the industry I would see anecdotally though is like you have people who own fast fashion brands are men. You have a huge amount of the people who own sustainability fashion brands or new forms of fashion brands like New, which is all about sharing, like rental platforms in the UK. They're run by women, and so there's like a huge movement in like the actual chain, like people trying to change the industry are women. And there's probably something to it as well by basically like women being dictated to by the fashion industry for like years and years and years, and actually just kind of wanting to change it to the way that we would actually like to see it operate. And then you just have like, I guess what you kind of have as an inequality is that like men are the people who profit from the industry, women work in the industry, women are trying to change the industry, women seem to be the most involved in changing the industry as well. That's just kind of from like what I would see from experience.
Paula, what's your experience with the gender component?
From my experience in the gender component, I always tell this story to the people that I talk with in other panel discussions, is that many times people just talk that female are the only consumers, which it is, I will say in a percentage, is way more females than men, obviously. But what shocked me a lot is, for example, in South America, as we all know, I guess, there's a big macho culture that is very toxic sometimes. And so guys are really never to be seen buying clothes, you know? And back home I did clothes swaps, and I also did some discussions with my school and stuff on sustainable fashion. And also I did a big thesis on it. And in South America, at least in my countries, it's really seen as homosexual to be a guy and to care about clothes. So no one did it, like male-wise. And all was female in South America. While here in Europe, like compared to the global south, like males consume a lot of fast fashion. So it's a massive problem anyways, guys. But the problem, I find the biggest problem is that with my clothes swaps, then they don't want to enter because it seems like a girly thing, although they consume a lot of clothes anyways, you know? And also what I realized here in Ireland, because sometimes we did some protest stuff and like we enter some stores with our groups. And so it's always like they're in these JD stores and sports. So sports clothing is such a massive, horrible industry now that also is very targeting men. And so I think it's not so gender-wise in Europe, at least. Like I think it's very mixed.
Yes, what is your favorite pre-loved piece?
We need to show it.
If you have it there, but you can also describe it.
I didn't have it with me, but I took a cardigan from my granny. I don't necessarily know if she knows that I have that cardigan, but I love it and I wear it way more than she does. But I did that when I was like 16, and like when I was 16 I was like so into fast fashion and all this kind of stuff as well, and like hadn't really I hadn't even really kind of gotten into clothes swaps or anything yet. But I think that was kind of like, it was just this gorgeous, gorgeous cardigan. And it was like real boohoo chic. And it was like, I remember wearing it and being like, oh my God, this is so well made. And it was like the first time that I'd ever noticed a piece of clothing being well made, because I'd never got a well made piece of clothing before. And after that, I was just like, I always think back to that piece. And I just think like she's obviously had it for her whole life. I've had it for a good like 10, 11 years now. And it's just like perfect condition, and it just lasts. And I take care of it so well. And I guess that's when I kind of like started understanding like what it means to have an investment piece and a piece that lasts your whole life. And then like I will eventually give that piece to someone else, but like there's a whole story attached to it. And it's like, just as in like, I think what's so beautiful about pre-loved pieces is like, they just, it's not necessarily like whether they were cheap or whether you got them for a certain price or anything like that, but it's like they have such like a different sense of value, because you're not necessarily just trying to hold on to it because of the price of the piece, but like because what it stands for, and because how you feel about it, and because you know that it's had another life. And then you kind of get into the mindset of like wanting to continue that. So yeah, like that's my favorite piece. But I think it's like really important to actually have a piece that you really love, because if you don't have a piece in your wardrobe that you love, your relationship to fashion is so different, because then you can't really tell why you buy things. And it's like really important to know that, because then you're just buying things for the sake of it. Like, so it's like, yeah, getting that kind of understanding and like the emotional attachment, I think is one of the most important things. And it's something that like fast fashion has like brainwashed us to kind of lose as well. It's like you don't want to wear something twice, but like if you really, really love something, like you wouldn't, I don't know, buy a car and then not use it more than once. Like, why would you do that? So like, what do we do with our clothes?
Paula, did you find your item, or do you want to describe it as well?
It's this girl here.
Oh, it's lovely.
Amazing.
Yeah, I love her. It's really cool because my mom made it. So
Cool.
yeah, I also think that's so important, and not many people talk about it like in the fashion industry. But I think learning how to make your clothes, it's amazing. Like I've learned how to repair so much and how to actually create clothes. And I think, for example, the fashion is an art, like fashion is an art, but an art, it's meant to express things. So I completely agree. It's like impossible for us to be buying things and then wear it once and then that's it, and buy new stuff. Like that's not fashion even. I don't think fast fashion is fashion, because fashion should be you expressing yourself, like you even creating and like expressing like your personality through things. So of course you're gonna keep like developing all your wardrobe and like you changing it, you know. I don't know, like I think now it's so messed up, the concept of fashion.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and one we should keep asking. We do an event called Fashion Relief, which is a sustainable fashion focus as well. And Lorraine Keane, the broadcaster Lorraine Keane, is the kind of co-founder of that. And when she was on Ireland AM, TV3's Virgin Media's Ireland AM a couple of weeks ago, talking about that event, her and the presenters were talking about how, you know, when they first worked in television, you know, you would never want to be seen in the same outfit twice on TV, and how now with the sustainable fashion movement, which she's a real advocate of, it's a badge of honor to be seen, and you know, to reuse your dress, or to reuse an item of clothing, or to upcycle it, or to swap it, or to sell it on through events like Fashion Week. So I think that's really exciting. My favorite pre-loved piece, it's probably really obvious and boring, but it's my wedding dress. I bought a vintage wedding dress that then I got tailored by a really great a seamstress in Dublin called Caoimhe Keane, who uses recycled materials, so recycled silks and laces, and she turned it into an actual dress that you could wear. It was not what I bought. It's definitely my favorite. Beloved item that I will never wear again, or maybe I will. Who knows?
I'm going to look at what is your go-to piece of clothing to wear at home right now, other than activewear, pajamas, loungewear. That's from Anya.
Well, it's not this blouse. It is tracksuit. Yeah, a kind of a tracksuit sweatshirt, and kind of baggy trousers. I think I've been wearing them mostly, variations of baggy trousers / sweatshirts. So it was nice to have an opportunity to put on a blouse today, which is pre-loved as well. Had to be done for this panel discussion.
Yeah, for like anything that involves me having to go on video, I just put this like same dress on. So it's like one of the ones from the new platform, but I borrowed it before the pandemic, and like nobody is able to re-exchange their pieces, so we've asked everyone to just keep them. So I'm having a great time. So I just like put it straight on because it's a wrap dress, and then I just take it straight off and go back into my activewear.
Amazing.
Yeah. I'm just living in shorts and a big jumper. I'm not that fun.
Which one do you all think would be the most important policy change that should happen as soon as possible?
I think the most effective one might be the one that France brought in, that says that essentially punishes brands for having too much stock. Because I think if we did potentially like the recycling fee, you, like as Alice was saying, like we need to just prevent the waste from ever getting to the point at which it becomes waste. So if you have kind of like a policy that brands don't want to have too much stock, because it's cheaper for brands to produce high quantities of stock than it is to produce low quantities. So it's cheaper for them to overproduce and undersell than it is to produce the right amount and potentially like sell a little bit less than that total amount. And so it's like it benefits them to just create waste. So I would think like a policy that's going to affect the waste that they have, or that they have to do something with that waste and it has to be tracked, might be the most effective one, should we not be able to bring in everything at once, which it seems we can't.
Thanks, that's really good. Paula, you want to go next?
Yeah. I've read that this should be a choice. I don't know. Well, like I've been thinking a lot about it because I bet it's really complex and difficult to for governments. So that I think it's a bit of an issue sometimes. A lot of people that I know into environmentalism are like, oh, you should put this policy forward. But I study politics, and we study a lot how difficult it is to put actually policies forward. It's not like as a government you can just be like, oh, this is done and that's done, mostly when there's such a high demand. But I do believe they should, just because we are in a climate crisis and because of human rights. So I will say the one that I've read and I think should be very urgent, but so many should be urgent. It will be that the local government of one of the brands, for example, Pennies is Irish and H&M is Swedish and Inditex is Spanish. So all of the Zara, Bershka, Stradivarius, they should like tell them to pay like a really like way higher percentage to their like sweatshop workers, that like equals like it's a calculation that it is possible for them to pay way more and to actually give them possible living standards if the government will be like, you cannot be acting like this even if it's a foreign country. Because I think what the difficult part in fast fashion too is that these brands, in order to act so horribly, they just move to countries where the governments are not very caring about human rights with their populations, and they just bribe governments. And I think a local government should kind of take responsibility for it in some point.
Yeah, certainly. Alice, what's your recommendation?
Yeah, I would agree. I think, you know, I was really pleased to hear the other panelists flag inequality as the root cause of so many issues globally right now, including lots of the issues throughout the fashion industry as well. And I think, you know, for us as an organisation, the way to tackle that is transparency. And I think the way to tackle the issues within the fashion industry is also transparency. So I think one of the most important policy changes that we could make now to begin with is to just insist on transparency throughout the textile chain, so that we as consumers are really clear on what the problem is and the scale of the problem, from waste right through to garment workers' rights. So I think that would probably be what I would suggest in terms of a beginning to insist on transparency, so that everyone from government to business to private sector to the public are very clear on where the issues lie and what policy changes and legislation we need to tackle it.
So Kira asks if you've noticed that the sustainable choices that you've made have inspired any of your family and friends to make better choices as well. A more personal question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've had a good few like hardcore fast fashion fans who go to great lengths to like tell me when they've done something sustainable. So it's really nice. I'll get like we actually were on a conference call with like kind of like a partner that we work with. They're like potentially kind of like large corporate offices, like all that kind of stuff. And the lawyer on the call was basically like, guys, I just need to tell you this before we start. I was gonna buy online 3 times and I thought of you guys and I just said no, I don't need it. And we were like, yes. So I think like although sometimes you can be viewed as like the ranty friend in your group or like the person who just gets like really annoying at parties, like a lot of people actually kind of do listen to you, and it's just like all about the education side of it. Like as Paula was saying earlier, like people just don't know sometimes, and we can't really change things if we just actually don't know what's happening in the industry. So I think what's quite nice about like the likes of New is that when we began with the platform, we wanted to build something that was very much solution focused, because like we just found that we were ranting to our friends about the problem the entire time. But it's more like when you give people solutions, or you like recommend a brand, or you recommend they do something, that they have a real tangible way of then telling you that they had achieved that. So yeah, there's been so many people, and I think that like we would have started swap shops about 5 years ago, and then New has kind of grown just a lot since the very beginning, like as a sustainable fashion community, into what it is now. And even like the mindset in general society has changed so much. Like at the very beginning when we were talking about this, people didn't even really realize that fashion was an impact to the environment at all, or like how are those two things related. So those kind of conversations are just like brilliant to hear when people are, like have changed habits, or they actually just even think about that in their daily lives. I think that's a massive win.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that, well, I hope I've inspired some of my family and friends, but they've equally inspired me back. So I think, yeah, we talked about it earlier about how this sort of sustainable fashion is a real community and a real movement and a real kind of knowledge sharing space, and comes with lots of kind of hacks on how to upcycle or repurpose clothes. So yeah, I think I have and I am inspired to keep making changes. Yeah, I think, and lots of exciting initiatives in friend groups, including clothes swaps, and just learning how to be more sustainable and live a more sustainable lifestyle. And I think the really nice part of that is that is really community led, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Mm-hmm.
Paula, you want to tell us about your experience?
Yeah, I find actually 100% the ranty friend, like, and like the annoying person at the party. It's like everything I talk about when I meet someone. But the thing is, like, I'm very, very vocal about fast fashion and stuff. When I started in UCD my first year, and then when I started doing the clothes swap, like I do believe it's great to educate consumers, but I think the best thing you can do is to give them solutions to take instead of going back to fast fashion. And it's really funny because like when I walk in UCD campus, tons of people are like, hey, I got this in your clothes swap, or like, oh, I don't buy fast fashion anymore. And I'm like, be happy. And yeah.
Alice, are there any partnerships with local designers in Oxfam to get fabric pieces for upcycling into new pieces? Could be a great way to extend the life cycle before recycling, if possible.
Yeah, it is a really lovely idea, and it's something we have done in the past with individual designers, and then also with places like Zipyard that take items of clothing and then kind of upcycle them or remodel them to fit the person who wants to buy them. We don't have any at the moment, so yes, anyone in this group who'd like to explore that, we'd be really open to it, because it is a really nice way to extend the life cycle and make sure that it works for the person purchasing it. We also have furniture stores, so you can upcycle furniture as well. We used to have a partnership with a local kind of upcycling college course, and they used to upcycle furniture for free as part of their projects, and then we were able to sell them in our furniture shop, always for a little bit more, because they were lovelier to look at and to use. So there's lots of scope in our shops across our clothes and furniture for upcycling.
That's really great. About educating consumers. Do you think educating consumers is key, and how could this be done in the Irish market? She says that some other countries like Germany have this consciousness of circular economy already developed amongst their population, and how could this be adapted to Ireland?
Can I, Doug?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I'm completely like all about education. Like if I seen that something works in people, is to educate them, because I fully believe that many people, many consumers do not know what's happening. And the fashion industry does this amazing job of like masquerading itself into this beautiful thing for you when it's actually horrific. And educating, not just with facts, but also with solutions, I think it's key. And I do believe government should educate the population too, like somehow, about circular economy, but if they care.
Yeah, I think there needs to be like a really high level implementation of like education around what it is that we're trying to build. Because I guess like if you think about what people learn in school, they just learn the linear economy. Nobody calls it that. And then I think what's difficult is like circular economy isn't very accessible language. Like if you want to know what circular economy is, like you kind of have to go and listen to a talk on it or go and find that out yourself. And then there's like, I guess like loads of miscommunication in the business industry about like what is business, what is social enterprise, what is charity, what is tech for good. Can a business be good and still but not be a charity? Like, and just there's like so much confusion about what is good business, which nowadays seems to be like the businesses that make the most money, but then like what kind of businesses are good for people, and like and then it's just all about like how do we track our kind of like country output, and it's like all on GDP and instead of like well-being and like more people focused. So I like one example that I saw one time was the news. It's just like RTE, but it had one whole segment on climate change. And then the next segment was that we need to start pushing people to spend on the high street. And it's just like so conflicting. So it's like, okay, well, you're understanding that there's a massive problem, and yet we're still just trying to push into this kind of like old way of doing things. So there needs to be like a real understanding in the government of like, what is circular economy, or what kind of like new way of living do we need to adopt, and can we just make that really accessible and like start actually talking to people about that in a language that they can understand. Because I think what can sometimes happen for a lot of people is like this inequality presents itself again, where like if you don't feel like you're educated enough or you don't understand enough about this, you can't participate in it. And that's going to be the worst thing, is that if we create this kind of circular economy that then becomes another elitist economy, and people are locked out of it because of certain circumstances in their own lives, or that they haven't been included in those kind of conversations and they haven't been able to shape them. So I think like equality just passes through that the whole time, but like it needs to come from a government level as well as a kind of like education level. Like conversations like this are brilliant because like so many people, we're all just sharing our own experiences, and all of the experiences are valid, and those kind of like round table discussions are really, really good. So I think it's important that we keep them going, but we start to implement them on a higher level too, that like people are really involved in this. Like if it's about fast fashion and it's about circular economy, there needs to be a citizens assembly on it, and we need to start understanding what people know about this situation and what people understand about the economy as it is, and how they understand how we would implement that in the future. I think that's probably like a good route that would need to be taken, where people are actually involved in those conversations and that kind of education has rolled out.
So, Alice, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I don't have very much to add other than I really agree. I think education around some of those more buzzwords or opaque terms, that we use, like circular economy, what does that actually mean and how does that translate? I think, education around the impact of the fashion industry on the environment is really key. And I suppose for us, what that actually means for the world's poorest and most vulnerable is really key. I think one of the key things that we try to communicate in our awareness raising around climate crisis is that it's not a far off reality, it's a lived one right now for the people that we work with. And that has to stay front of mind. Extreme weather events that are destroying the lives and livelihoods of the world's poorest, they're happening right now. It's not something we can talk about in 2025 or 2050. It's 2020. So I think that's a key part of the education as well, to keep up in terms of the urgency of this and how action is really needed now. That's the only thing I'd add.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts on it. And I think, yeah, the urgency and also the awareness that everybody needs to have access to that level of education is very key in the conversation. So I'm very happy that we recorded that meeting and we'll be able to share it on our social media. And if you want to, we'll facilitate it to you so you can also share it. So before we close, because I think we covered all the questions, I would like to invite you and give you the chance to just address a couple, or have a minute or two, address a couple of things you might want to address and close off your line of thoughts.
I think like next week we're going to be doing a lot of stuff with a new community just around Fashion Revolution. So there'll be kind of like webinars and discussions like this, a couple of challenges that people can take part in. So it'd be great to have people involved. If you would like to download the app, it's just thenewwardrobe.com, and new is spelled NU. And like we're just really trying to build a large community of like-minded women who are kind of trying to create this change as well. So yeah, it would be amazing to have anyone who's interested to get on board. And if you have any ideas, just like DM us on Instagram or reach out to us via email if there's any kind of things you'd like to follow up on or more information that you're looking for. We'd be delighted to help. And thanks for having me.
I will say, if anyone watching this is in UCD or in a college, they go in our Eco SU, because you can always be part of the new committee to the clothes swaps, always be part of the new Green Week for UCD, which is like a great place to meet people that think like you and just grow in all your information about sustainability.
Great.
Yeah, likewise, I'd just really like to thank Charlotte and Roberta for organising, and Aisling and Paula for being great co-panelists. It was a really, and for everyone who asked questions, I found it really interesting and inspiring and educational. I think it's really important to keep having this conversation. Really glad that other people can listen in. Oxfam, I suppose the last thing I'd just say is to, if you are kind of decluttering and you would like to donate at the end of this when we get freed, think of us. And if you have a local Oxfam, if you have a local charity shop, please do drop our work on sustainable fashion and ways that you can join it or campaign. Just keep an eye on our website and our social channels.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I want to thank all the panelists, Alice, Aisling and Paula, for making the time and for joining us for that discussion. And of course, I want to thank all the participants for joining in, asking really engaged and interesting questions. I want to thank Roberta, Lisa and Aubrey for helping organise the panel and for being part of our UCD Fair Fashion community for the year. And then, of course, Paula, as you mentioned, for everyone at UCD, get engaged and take part in activities that are going on. And then I also want to highlight that we have a competition that's starting at the moment, and it'll be open until May 3rd. It's all about upcycling, and I just dropped the link in the chat. So if anybody wants to hear more about it, open it up and you can win some good prices, and yeah, just get creative and use the time while you're still at home to change an item that you might have loved before but might want to change at the moment. And then, yeah, I think we come to the end of the panel. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks for being a part of it. And then I stop recording and close the meeting. Thank you very much, and
Thanks,
have a lovely
Jen.
afternoon.
Thanks so much, guys.
Bye. Thank you,
Bye.
guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Lovely
Thanks.
lunchtime. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bye.
Cool.
Bye-bye.